All right. Well, last week I talked about authentic relationships and how it's so important that we are authentic with ourselves, that we understand who we are and who God made us to be, that we understand and we live authentically before God and with others. And I think out of all three of those categories, the hardest one is always the others. It's the other people. People are difficult, aren't we? I said we. Aren't we difficult? We are difficult at times. Sure we are. And that's why this is so important. Last week, and I'll run through this real quick, I introduced you to the Johari window. And I talked about how there are 4 quadrants to our life. What's open, what everybody knows about us and we know about ourselves. The blind areas, the areas that we don't know about ourselves, but other people do. The obvious things that we miss. The closed areas, these are the hidden areas of our life that we just don't want to talk about. And then the unknown area. And we said that the way to, what we really want to do is live in open relationships, closer, deeper relationships. But we can't have those kind of relationships if everything stays surfacey in news, weather, and sports. The only way for us to have better marriages, better relationships with our kids, with our coworkers, our neighbors, is for us to expand that open box. And the way we push that wall sideways and down is through asking and telling. That's what we have to do. To open that up, we have to ask. We have to say, hey, if you see something in me that bugs you or something that's going to hurt me, would you tell me? And then brace yourself, and remember you did ask them. And then to tell. You're going to have to disclose something to people about yourself. And every time you do, and you become vulnerable and take that risk, it encourages them to take the same risk. There are couples that never have an ask or tell discussion. There's just not enough trust there. There's hurts, there's wounds, and that's too risky. But the cool thing is, and I think we have this on the next slide, as we reveal more about ourselves, that open area gets pushed out. And what's really cool, it gets pushed into the unknown. The unknown becomes reality. These are the areas you don't even know you're good at yet. Areas of leadership, places of ministry and influence. Things that you haven't attempted before because you just didn't feel like you could. And as we get more open in our relationships, then our friends, our spouses, they encourage us. You can do that. Do more. Come on. And we begin to believe that. And so that's what's happening, and we're growing. Well, the verses I shared last week about this was Matthew 22, where Jesus summarized the whole Bible. He said everything about the Bible can be summarized in these 2 commands. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. In other words, left and right brain. This is the first and greatest. The second is equally important. Notice the word equally. Equally important. Jesus is going to tell us that loving people is just as important as loving God. Now, that's a nice thought, but I don't know if we really believe that. Because there's a whole lot of people I don't like as much as God. How about you? People that hurt children, people that do deviant things, people that cause terror in the world, and so on. Now, thankfully, I don't have to love those people right up close. So, that makes it easier, but it's still difficult. He says, but love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and demands of prophets, everything in the Bible, he says, is summed up in those 2 things. First John said, if someone says, I love God, but hates his fellow believer, that person is a liar. For if we do not love people we can see, how can we love people we cannot see? So loving people is equal to loving God. We can't hate people and love God. Now, I want to say right at the beginning here, if you're involved in a relationship where you're being abused, physically, emotionally, get out. Get away. Don't continue to be hurt and abused for the sake of, well, I don't want to lose the relationship, or God would be disappointed with me. No, take care of yourself. You need to. Now, because they just looked at you the wrong way, that's not a reason to run. But I think you know the difference. So I want to say that up front, because there's a lot of people that bear a lot of pain over the years and stay in relationships where they really are abused. But because they're Christian, they feel like they can't leave. And stepping away from the relationship for a season to heal and to try to work on it is better than staying in and hurting each other more and more. Okay? But today what we're going to focus on, and it leads right into this area, is handling conflict. I think if I would have put a menu out today and I had handling conflict on there as one of the topics, it probably would have been near the bottom, right? But it's important to us. And Jesus had some things to say about it, and the Bible does. And it makes a big difference in our life. So that's what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about everyday conflicts, like in marriages and families and neighbors and social encounters and even coworkers. What I'm going to share with you applies to all these kind of relationships and encounters. In fact, Carrie Patterson, in his book, Crucial Conversations, they discovered through their research that 95% of workforces struggle, or people in the workforce struggle to speak up to their colleagues. Think of all the tension that's going on in the workplace and in environments because people just don't want to deal with conflict. Anybody run toward conflict? There's only a couple people I've met over the years that really love God and run toward conflict. They don't want to let it go. Scott Himes is like that. Scott the minute he senses there's a conflict, he'll jump right in the middle of it. We're going to get this fixed. And it's amazing. And he does it just with such incredible love. When we first meet somebody, relationships are difficult, but when we first meet somebody, isn't it wonderful? You know, you first meet somebody and casually, or especially if you're dating or something like that, you're wanting to know everything about them. You're trying to find areas where you have common ground and where you connect. And, what music do you like? What movies? Who'd you vote for? Well, maybe not that, but, what's your view on this social topic and so on? We tend to avoid those. But, it's fun. But then we start to see differences as we go a little bit longer into the relationship. And we start to discover, oh, you hold that view. Huh, I didn't realize that. Or you feel that way about this or that, whatever it might be. And then you move in a stage where not only differences, but now you start to reach sometimes these critical junctures where you have to decide, is this worth working through, or is this a relationship killer? Is this something we can't get past? What I'm shocked at is how many couples that things should be dealt with that could be relationship killers, and they just go right past it and avoid it because it affects the relationship. So they carry this into marriage. And guess what happens after marriage? It doesn't go away. Who knew? I do pre-marriage counseling with a lot of people. It's always funny. I used to do like 6 sessions. And we'd cover all kinds of stuff. And money and sex and values and all that kind of stuff. And I realized they didn't care about any of those things right now. Working on your character and who you were as a person was right up there with what color the bridesmaids' dresses were going to be. All the important stuff. It was all the same. So now I do about 2 or 3 sessions and build a relationship with them, talk about communication, and then when the crisis hits after the marriage, that's when I want to be there for people. That's when it gets real. So, if we're going to have any depth in any relationship, if we're going to open that box by asking and telling, if we're going to have closer relationships with anybody, we're going to have to learn how to handle conflict. And one of the challenges of handling conflict is that we respond in a conflict, how we respond in a conflict is actually determined before we ever engage with that person. And I'll show you how that works. Sorry, my notes went dead for a minute here. Here we go. A little brain science first. Whenever I encounter someone, I would step into a meeting or just have an encounter with someone, maybe I'm returning something at a store or something like that. My brain is active. Yours is too. We have typically about 200 thoughts per second. And then another 200, then another 200. And in those thoughts, we're deciding a whole lot. Is this person safe? Will this person bring me joy and peace? Or does my brain have to stay in fight or flight mode? See, all these predetermining factors matter. How much trust do we have with them? Have you ever, it's like when you see a friend you haven't seen for a while, and you've just shared a lot of life together, and you get together, and oh man, you've experienced this joy, but there's another sense I was thinking about. It's the sense of relaxing. You ever notice that? When you're with somebody you really like, you just relax. You don't have to worry about what you say, how you say it. You're not going to be misunderstood. You don't have to be careful. You can just be yourself, let your hair down, and you relax because that person is safe. And so we're constantly deciding that. A lot of it is determined by our experience of conflict in the past. If you watched a movie where somebody, was jumped when they walked down a dark alley, you might think about that next time you walk down a dark alley. You might not, just be lackadaisical about it and just real casual. You might be in that fight or flight mode, and sometimes that's good. But a lot of how you respond in a conflict is a lot the way your parents handled conflict. Like I say, when we don't know what to do, we run home. When we're at our weakest, we run home. So part of counseling is always, how did your parents deal with conflict? And that's what you're doing. Surprise. Yet you vowed you'd never be like your parents. You know when you're like your parents? When you lose control and you're at your weakest. You run home. You do what they did. And what's interesting is I talk to a lot of couples. How many would say this? My parents never fought in front of us. They never argued in front of us. Anybody have those kind of families? See, a lot did. So the problem is you never learned how they handled conflict because they always did it behind closed doors. See? So it's good in a sense that you didn't see them fight or argue. Now, I saw my parents, I saw a lot of bad stuff. Physical abuse and so on and so forth. And so God had to deal with all that stuff in me because I didn't want to take that into a marriage. I didn't want to take that into parenting. I wanted to be free from that. All these factors affect how we communicate with someone. Can we trust them? Can we open our lives? Can I be vulnerable? And vulnerable is risky. But when we invest in a relationship, when we ask and tell, it's like we're depositing money in a bank account. And we get to live off the dividends of that. Every time you take the risk of opening your life a little more and say, I've never shared this with anybody, but this is something that I wrestle with. Or this is a concern to me. And so on. Or, do you mind if I share this with you? You know I love you, but you've got a blind spot here. Ooh, that's risky, isn't it? It's so scary. And if we're on the receiving end of that, be aware that that person's taking a huge risk to talk to you. They're seeing how much money they have in the bank because they're about to make a withdrawal. And they hope there's enough to cover it. But the good news is, when people make those deposits into your life, you spend the rest of your life enjoying the benefits, living off the dividends of having that kind of conversation. Now, as I mentioned, we decide what we're going to do in every situation ahead of time. So when we get into a conflict with somebody, and this is a thing I use sometimes in counseling, there are 4 places you can go in a conflict. And again, you go there as soon as you get in the conflict. It has nothing to do with the conflict. Gottman, from the Gottman Institute, I forgot his first name, John Gottman. He said that 94% of the time, the way we start a discussion is how we will end it. That not a whole lot happens in an argument. We just kind of go to our areas, stay there, and then go back to our areas. So what I'm going to show you is the 4 ways that we tend to respond. And how we respond depends on a couple things. Let's go to the next slide. How much self-worth do we have? If I feel like my opinion is valid, and I have something to bring to this relationship or this conflict, and that's high, and I have a concern for the others that might be low or high. So depending on my self-worth and how much I value my own thoughts, high and low, or the other person, high and low, and the relationship will determine which box I run to. So the first one is the person that always has to win. They have a high regard for themselves, but they're more important than the other person, and their opinion is more important than the other person. Can anybody relate to that? Do we have any winners here? Sure. This is not one of those where it's good to be a winner, by the way. Maybe I fooled you into raising your hand. I've been a winner. For years, just had to win. Insecurity. It's not even about the argument. It's not even about the topic. It's just about winning. Because I'm so insecure, I have to be right. And that's not good. Now, if you have a high regard for the relationship and low self-esteem, you run to the opposite corner and you yield. You just give in. You don't want to fight. Peace at all costs. There's no purpose in fighting. Yes, honey, whatever you say. A lot of people are yielders. Now, what's interesting, a lot of marriages, that's the two people, right? You have winners and yielders. And the yielders are always giving up for the sake of peace. See? Lori and I were in that relationship. I was the winner, she was the yielder. Until one day. And it wasn't even a big thing. But her cup was absolutely full. And we're not going to yield anymore. And part of it was God working in me. But, that happens. You get to a point where, or the other thing that happens is this. The yielder quits yielding. The winner has nothing to win. And so they go to this one, and that's to withdraw. And they withdraw because it's not even worth talking anymore. This is a couple that's pretty much divorced. They just haven't signed the papers yet. They've quit talking. It's not worth it. We've had this argument. It doesn't make any sense. Now, this relationship can be fixed. It can be recovered. I'm not saying it's over. It doesn't have to be. But that's the direction it's going. Now, ideally, if you have a high regard for a relationship and a high regard for yourself, which you should have, like we talked about last week, being authentic to yourself, to others, if we have that going on and God at the center of it, especially if God's at the center of your relationship, what are you going to try to do? What are you going to do when there's a conflict? We're going to work it out. We're going to resolve it. And that's the next one. That's what we're always aiming for. To resolve this. It's hard work, but we're going to get this done because I feel like what I have to share is important and my view is important. And I respect what you're saying too. We've got to get to this. We've got to get this settled. We've got to work through it. And that's hard work. Okay? Now, there is another option. And that means that, what we can do is we can compromise. And I like to illustrate it this way. You want a blue car, and I want a red car. So what do? We get a purple car. Right? Because it's a perfect blend. Everybody's happy with the purple car, aren't we? That's about how compromise works. Everybody's begrudging the solution. And that's not the best in a relationship. So, if those are the things, if those are our choices, which one do you normally go to? When you and your spouse have a conflict, when you and your coworkers, and here's what you'll discover. It's not just in your marriage. It's in your parenting, it's in your work life, it's in your neighborhood, with your friends, even people you don't know and have social encounters with. If you're a winner, you'll be a winner in all of those, unfortunately. If you're a resolver, that's what you'll seek to do in every relationship. What's the reason or what's the root you go to this spot? And like I said, a lot of times it's how your parents did it. Maybe there's been trauma in your life and you're trying to be protective. I get that. But these are the questions we have to answer if we're going to discover and we're going to have healthy relationships like this. And I would encourage you, this is a good picture. I see people taking their phones out, take a picture. Smart idea. Have a discussion about that. Say, let's talk about this. And be humble and say, I find myself needing to win. And I don't know why. We can help you with that. That's where some good counseling can come in to help you. Now, Pete Scazzaro has some really good advice on how we handle conflicts. I'm going to share a few of his thoughts. He calls this fighting clean. Just like in a boxing match, when the ref calls the two boxers out, the first thing he says is, I want a clean fight. You can pummel each other as much as you want, but just keep it clean. I'm not sure that relates to, it's a good illustration for marriage, but you get the point. Pete calls a clean fight, he said, is a negotiation between two people for the sake of their relationship. That's what it is. A clean fight is a negotiation between two people. You can put that slide up. There we go. That's what it is. So we're coming together. It's a negotiation, see? It's what each is willing to give up. Sometimes Lori will give up just for the sake so I can have the win. And sometimes I'll do that for her. The worst is in choosing a restaurant. Have you ever done that? Or you got a day off and you want to please each other. No, I want to do what you want to do. No, I want to do what you want to do. No, I want to eat where you want to eat. No, I don't. I know you don't like that place, but I really want to go there. Well, let's go there. No, I don't want to do that because you wouldn't like it. Yeah. And we start that at noon, and now it's dark outside. We still haven't eaten. We haven't gone anywhere. We're just still trying to work it out somehow. And we end up, I think last time we did that, we ended up eating tuna fish at home or something out of a can or something. Yeah, Chick-fil-A. Romans 12 says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. Do all that you can to live at peace with everyone. That's the goal. Now, I'm going to tell you something that you know. I'm going to reinforce it again. And it's one of those messages that we have to preach over and over and over at church because it's one of the hardest things for us to do as a believer, and that is this, to forgive. Forgiveness is a vital part of handling conflict and getting past it. It's vital to peace. Now let me say this. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same. Okay? We always forgive. We don't always reconcile. Now that's important because for years I taught people, look, you got to forgive and you got to reconcile. You got to get this right. And I realized I was pushing people into something that was impossible for them to do because it involves our emotions and there has to be healing there and so on. But hear this, and this is critical. To forgive is something we do not because the other person deserves it or they've earned it or they won't hurt us again or anything like that. The reason why we forgive is because Jesus commanded us to. And we forgive for that reason, and sometimes that reason alone. Forgiveness is a choice you make in obedience to God. Reconciliation is a process you go through to restore a relationship. Okay? That's so important, folks. I forgive someone because Jesus forgave me, and that's enough for me. See? It doesn't mean I'm letting them off the hook. It doesn't mean I'm inviting them to come hurt me again. It doesn't mean we're going to go camping together tomorrow. It simply means that I am not going to hold this sin against them because God doesn't hold it against them. And that if I hold on to it, it's going to hurt me and not them. Forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness is for you. It's for the other person, but it's primarily for you. Because it gets you out of that enemy mode and out of that contention mode with somebody. Again, reconciliation is a process. So when I tell you you need to forgive, I'll always challenge you, but Tony, you don't know what they did to me. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And I'm so sorry that happened to you. But you still need to forgive. But that's letting them off the hook. No, God takes care of that part. God says, I'll take care of that. Don't worry. Vengeance is mine. I'll take care of all that stuff. God handles the justice area. But we are the ones who forgive. Okay? How can you tell you've really forgiven someone? That's a process. Here's how you can tell you've forgiven someone. When they can pass through your thoughts without leaving muddy footprints. When that person can pass through your mind and you don't cringe, you don't wish them evil, but you say, God, bless them. God, make their life better. Now, sometimes what I'm praying for there is that they would come to the truth, maybe as I see it. But what I'm wanting is God to work in their lives. And eventually, I've been able to reconcile with some people that just did some awful stuff to me. And I've been able to reconcile with them to the point where I'm really happy to see them. I'm not going to let them hold my wallet. But I really do want God to bless them. And as I start to understand the pain in their lives, and the more I pray for them, it's interesting. You start praying for your enemies, as Jesus told us to, you start seeing life from their perspective. Well, I don't want to see that. Look, I want to be mad at them. I want to think they deserve everything I'm throwing at them. I want bad things to happen. That'll teach them a lesson. Kindness and love and God's grace teaches us the lessons of life better than pain. And when I pray for that person, I pray God's blessing on them. More of a revelation of who He is to them so that they can be healed from their past and they quit hurting people. See? And that's a genuine prayer that we can pray. Remember, this is God's son or daughter you are in conflict with. He will not tolerate his child being hurt, abused, or gossiped about. He will come to their defense. You don't want to be on God's wrong side, so humble yourself and seek to end the conflict. That's the goal. Pete also says, Pete Scazzaro and Jerry, his wife, who wrote this book, EHR, says too often we settle for a false peace. For a false peace. We just don't want to have a conflict. So we just avoid it. Like those workers I talked about earlier, 94% of the workforce is in conflict, but nobody wants to talk about it. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. We are called to be peacemakers. What we settle for is peacekeepers. See, peacekeepers just keep the conflict down. Like when the UN sends peacekeeping forces into another country where there's tribal wars and so on, they're not there to resolve anything. They're just there to keep the shooting down. If you're a peacekeeper in a relationship, that's all you're doing. You're just trying to keep everything at peace. But a peacemaker does the hard work of confronting the situation, finding common ground, and bringing about healing. See? You say, I couldn't do that right now, Tony. I'm just still too hurt. It's too difficult. I get that. But pray about it. Say, God, help me to be a peacemaker. Help me to be a child of God. If God says this is who we are, as children of God, if we are peacemakers, then let's step into that role. Let's believe God to use us in that way. Amen? You're getting too quiet out there. Stepping on toes. Hey, believe me, God walks all over mine during the week on this stuff. Let me close with this. Let me give you a few things I've learned over the years about handling conflict. And I won't get to all of these, so we won't put this slide up. I'll just share some of these. So, years ago, 1991, I took a sabbatical from ministry. I was burnt out, insecure. God needed to do some work in me, some real brokenness and healing in my life. And I realized after 30 days of that, there was more that God wanted to do. And I didn't feel like I could really be effective in church ministry during that time. So I realized, you got to make money. Well, I hadn't worked in the secular field since I was 35 at the time. I hadn't worked in a secular field except for 2 years out of high school. That's the only work I'd done in the secular marketplace. I mean, I had a bunch of jobs before that and so on, but 2 years I worked full time. And then went to Bible college and then right into ministry. So I thought about this. I'm going to be going in the workforce. I'm not in ministry anymore. That's a different environment. That's the world. And those people are lost. And they hate Jesus. Or so I thought. They're going to rip me off. They're going to take advantage of me. Because they're secular people. And I got in the workforce. I started a company. It got successful. And I found that people really wanted to help me. And some people that really had no religious views in their life whatsoever were really nice people. They had incredible morality. They loved their families. They were good people. They took care of their lawn. They voted. I mean, these were nice people. And I started to think, and you've never had this thought, but sometimes people outside the church are a little nicer than people that go to church. Have you had that revelation? Yeah. So that was my view. It's like, what's wrong? Why do I feel that way? Well, one day I was in prayer and God said, I'll tell you why you feel that way, Tony. Is because in church, you expect everybody to look and act just like me. Except for yourself. You hold the bar way up here for everybody. And if people can't jump over that, they're not a good Christian. Because that's the standard. But where was my standard when I went into the secular workforce? There. My standard was so low for people out in the world that when they did good things, I was impressed. I applauded. And God said, Tony, get rid of this thing. Have the same low bar for people in the church that you do people in the world. Because people are people. And we all have bad days. Right? And there's some days and some moments that I don't look like Jesus. And that grieves me. And that's not an excuse, but it's a confession and a truth. And I don't want it to be that way. I say things to my wife or my kids or somebody in public that I'm embarrassed by later. And instantly know that didn't reflect Jesus whatsoever. But I've learned to lower that bar for people outside the church, people inside the church, and even myself. That yes, I mess up. And I make mistakes. But God in His grace is there. So, get rid of your bar. Don't hold this high standard for people because they're going to mess up. Lower it. And then, when they do something great, you'll appreciate it. When they do something not so great, you'll go, well, yeah, we're all messed up people. And we all struggle at times. And I bet that's not really who they are. Another thing, I like what he says, fix the problem, not the blame. I'm skipping live 4 to 6. I don't have time to go on that. Fix the problem, not the blame. In other words, focus on the issue. When you're having a conflict with someone, don't make it about them. Make it about the issue. Fix the problem, not the blame. Whenever a crisis happens, it's a common thing I see with people in crisis because I deal with them a lot as a chaplain, and they want to blame somebody. They have this anger because they've lost a loved one or this terrible accident or fire or some tragedies happened. And they need to blame somebody. So they have all this frustration and anger and they have a place to put it. And what I say to people is, let's not worry about blame. Let's focus on what we have to do next. Let's look at how we can move forward. Okay? Argue like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. Isn't that good? I like that. Argue like you're right. I mean, you have a view, so be willing to share that, but listen like you're wrong. That's why James 1 says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and the result is that you become slow to anger. And then finally, number 5, talk to the person, not about the person. I'm going to go to 5 people in the church and tell them about my situation because I just need their counsel and their advice and their encouragement. No, you're just gossiping. And that's a sin and it's wrong. And God has a whole lot to say about that. You're opposing Him and His church when you gossip about somebody. Matthew 18, Jesus said, you've got an issue? Go talk to the person. If they don't listen to you, only if they don't listen to you and you can't get any reconciliation, then take someone else. But 90% of the time somebody comes to me complaining about somebody else in the church, they haven't gone to them. So I just direct them back to Jesus, back to Scripture, and get them to do the right thing. But they don't want to because we don't like conflict. See? Colossians 3:13, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive them. 2 Timothy 2:24 says, a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone, be able to teach, and be patient with difficult people, and be patient with difficult people. That's what we're called to do. So this morning, why don't you bow your heads? Let me pray for you. Some of you are wrestling right now with some real pain in your life. You've been through some difficult times, trauma in your life, and you're not sure how to deal with it. Some of you are carrying wounds from people that hurt you in your past. And that thought of forgiving them and releasing them from that is so difficult. But reality is that's what you need to do. So I want to encourage you today, right now, that you just open your life to God and ask Him for the grace to do what you need to do. Father, I pray for every person here right now. For those, Father, that maybe don't have a relationship with you. And they're carrying a lifetime full of wounds and hurts and pains. And I thank you that you are so good when we come to you about lifting that off of us and giving us a new life. So, Father, right now, in the name of Jesus, we bless what you're doing in people's lives. God, draw people to yourself right now. Draw people to you, I pray, and help them to respond in this moment. In this holy moment, would you just on your own ask God for His grace? Maybe it's to know Him better. Maybe it's to receive His help in going through a crisis. Maybe it's to forgive. Whatever it is right now, would you just give that to God?